right, so we're starting this packet, this skills review note packet. You can access it in Canvas and print it out, or just follow along and look at it as we go. So we're just going to be talking about adding integers together. So if we have two, and it's not just integers, just any numbers. These all happen to be integers. We've got a negative plus a negative. We add the values together, but our answer stays negative. So if we have a negative 5 and a negative 9, we get a negative 14 because we're adding two negatives together. They keep the same value, and 5 plus 9 is 14. But they're both negative, so it stays a negative 14. So basically, it's kind of like saying, oh, we owe someone $5, and then we borrow another $9 from them, and now we owe them $14, right? It's a negative number, but they're added, values are added in the negative direction. I think we all are good with adding positive numbers. You add two positive numbers, you still have a positive number. What becomes tricky is when we're adding a positive and a negative number, we have to actually subtract the two numbers, and then we keep the value, we keep the positive or negative depending on which one is larger. So for example, in our first little example here, the negative 10 plus 7, you don't have to write anything on this page unless you want to like jot down some notes if something strikes you that you should write down as we go. So you can keep, you've got a negative 10 plus 7, so the value of a 10 is bigger than the value of a 7. So because this is a negative 10, we actually go like 10 minus 7, which gives us 3. But it's a negative 10 and a positive 7, which gives us an answer of negative 3, because the bigger value of the two numbers is 10, and that value is negative. So our overall answer is negative. Where in this next little example, we have 6 and negative 2. The 6 value is bigger than 2, so we go 6 minus 2 is 4, and we keep the positive 4 value because the 6 is bigger than the 2. You could just think of this as like 6 minus 2 is 4, right? So even though it has a plus and negative 2, adding a negative number is the same thing as just subtracting. So you can just add the opposite. That's what I was just talking about here. So you can either think of problems as subtraction or as adding the opposite. So 17 minus 3 would be the same thing as 17 plus a negative 3. If you'd rather think about it that way. That, to me, that feels like it's making it more complicated, but maybe not. When we get to multiplication, then we start getting really confusing because a negative times a negative equals a positive, right? Whereas we just said when we add negative numbers, we get a negative answer. But when we multiply negative numbers, we get a positive answer. We're not going to be working on those today, though. So maybe we'll come back and talk more about those later, the multiplication and division. So let's just focus on adding and maybe subtracting. So the first thing we're going to do here is on this page. You guys see this page in your notes? So there's a blank we can fill in. It says one positive integer blank, one negative integer. So the word we're looking for here in this case is cancels. One positive integer cancels one negative integer. So if we have a positive 1 and we add a negative 1, what's the result of that? 0. Let's go through and look at these problems together. I'll let you practice some of them. I mean, you can go through and do them on your own really fast if you want, and then we'll just check them together, or you can go through them with me as I do. So we have a negative 7 plus 9. The 9 is bigger than the 7, so that means we're more or less going 9 minus 7, right? So what's our answer for that one going to be, positive or negative? Positive 2, because we're taking the positive value of 9 and we're subtracting out 7 of those. We cancel 7 of the positives with our 7 negatives, and we're left with 2 positives. It's usually a little bit trickier when the bigger number is what's negative. So 2 plus negative 8. Hopefully we're trying these without a calculator just to stretch our brains and see if we're remembering how this works. 2 plus negative 8. Which is bigger, a 2 or an 8? The 8 is. So 2 plus negative 8, we're going to subtract the values. So that means we have 2 positive 2s that cancel with 2 negative 2s. What's left over? -6, right? Or you could just think of it as 8 minus 2. But because the 8 is negative and it's bigger than the 2, our answer is negative. Sometimes it helps if you have like a visual representation of this going on. Let's say that we have numbers that are negative. So we have 8 negatives, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we have 2 positives. And we just talked about how 1 positive and 1 negative cancel each other out, right? So 2 of those positives cancel out 2 of those negatives, and we're left with 6 negatives because the amount of negatives we had was bigger than the amount of positives we had. So several different ways of kind of thinking about this process as you do it if you're struggling with it. Okay, 4 plus 5, that should be easy. Just go ahead and yell out the answer with me. So 9. This time we have 2 negative numbers. So when that happens, we actually add the values together because there's no positives to cancel anything out. So we're going to do -7 and -3, which gives us a total of how many negatives? 10 negatives. What happens when we try to add 0? Nothing happens. We still have a -5 because none of our negatives get canceled out if there's nothing to add to them. When we add and subtract the same numbers, like a negative number and a positive number that are the same number, what do we get? 0, right? Because all 3 of those get canceled out by all 3 of those. All right, 6 plus -12. What happens here? 6 of our negatives get canceled out with the 6 positives. So we cancel those, subtract it. So 12 minus 6, and we're left with 6. Since 12 is the bigger negative number, our answer is -6. 6 of them canceled, we still have 6 left. These are both negative, -8 and -5. So do we add or subtract the 2 values? Add them together. So 8 and 5 is 13. But since they're both negative, we're just going to combine that into a more negative number, -13. Okay, what about this one? 16 plus -16. Yeah, perfect. All of them cancel out. Number 10, we're going to have -9 plus 29. So we have 29 positives and 9 negatives. So our 9 negatives cancel out 9 of our positives, and we're left with how many positives? 20. So 29 was the bigger of the 2 numbers. It's positive, the other one is negative. We're more or less subtracting those values. Even though it's written in the opposite order, it really could just be considered 29 minus 9. Okay, 35 plus a -13 is really just the same thing as 35 minus 13. What do we get? You guys get 22. We're canceling out 13 of our negatives. We have 22 positives left over. Last one. What do you get when you do this? Now you've just gone all bored and quiet on me. Okay, so -32, is that what you got? Okay, so you kind of saw that first Khan Academy assignment. It had to do with just adding negative numbers, but then the second assignment, I know you can't get to them right now because our internet is not working right. Let's go ahead and do subtraction 2. Though I think this is review enough for you guys that let's just kind of go through both of these at the same time. And then I'm going to figure out, we have 10 minutes till our cleanup bell, and then we have 10 minutes. Okay, so when we do subtracting of integers, we're going to change our subtracting into addition. Because then all we have to do is remember all of the addition stuff we were just doing. And then we don't have to learn how to subtract them too. So It may be easier to think about subtraction as combining integers. Sometimes, I know you've worked with variables already in past classes. If you think of it more as like combining like terms, except we don't have any variables at the moment. We're just combining the integers together. Okay? So when we change subtraction to addition, this can also be called adding the opposite or keep, change, change. I've not heard these values before, or these kind of phrases before. A lot of these notes I got from a teacher I was collaborating with over the summer from Cypress High School. This first unit is things that she does with her modern math classes just to make sure they've got these basic things before they jump into other stuff. So we're going to keep the first number the same. We're going to change the subtraction symbol to addition, and we're going to change the second number to its opposite. I don't know if you really need to do all that, but we're going to write it down that way just so you can see how we're applying this to being addition like we just did on the other page. So instead of -3 minus 7, we're going to think of it as -3 plus a -7. So we're adding two negative numbers together, which means we're getting kind of a larger negative number, right? So -3 and -7 ends up being what value? -10. Same idea if you want to just think of it as -3 minus 7, it means the same thing, or just combining. We're combining the -3 and the -7 together into a -10. Okay, kind of the same thing here. I know this feels redundant writing this down, like really kind of boring and repetitive, but I just want to make sure you understand this concept of adding the opposite. So instead of saying 6 minus 10, you can think of it as 6 plus a -10. So 6 of our positives and 6 of our negatives cancel out. How many negatives do we have left? 4. Good, because we're basically taking the value 10 and subtracting 6. But since -10 is the bigger number, the answer is negative. Okay, now things get interesting. Let's change this -4. Oh, not change the -4. It's still a -4. We're going to change this subtraction to a plus. So again, we're going to, oh, this isn't weird. It just was looking weird to me. So same thing. We're changing our subtraction to a plus, but we're adding a negative number. So now we're adding two negative numbers together. So what happens when we add two negative numbers together? We keep the value of the two numbers added, but the actual answer is going to be negative because we're not multiplying, we're just adding. If we were multiplying them together, it would go positive. But because it's a negative plus a negative, it stays negative. We're just going more negative, like you owe someone more money than you did before. Okay, 1 minus -5. This is where it really goes interesting. So we're changing our negative to a positive, but then we're also changing the sign of the 5. So not only are we changing our negative to a positive, but we're changing the -5 to a positive 5. Sometimes I like to think of this as just our negatives cancel each other out, because you could think of this as an invisible 1, right? And -1 times -5 is +5. So the two negatives multiplied together right there would turn out into a positive. I don't know if that makes it more confusing, but that's kind of how I think about it. So following what this page is telling us, we're really just switching this and this. So we turn that to a positive and turn that into a positive. So now we're just adding the two numbers together. So 1 plus 5 is 6, good. And then -5, and again, we're going to change this to adding and then to a +12. So -5 plus 12 would give us 7, right? And then 9, this is all just kind of the same idea. So if we're following this procedure on all of them, just to kind of get this idea of subtraction being adding the opposite. So instead of subtracting 12, we're adding -12, -3. And then here, instead of subtracting -7, we're going to add a +7 because we switched both of those signs. So positive, add +7. positive 15, right? The next one we have a negative 2, but we're going to add a negative 3 instead. So negative 2 adding a negative 3 just makes our number more negative. Further down the negative line, what do we get? Negative 5. Very good. We're almost done with these. So then same idea here. Negative 6 plus a negative 13. We're just adding the values together. We just get a larger negative number. So negative 6. So 6 and 13 added together. What do we get for that? I think it's 19, right? But because they're both negative, we get negative 19. Good. Last one here, we have a 4 plus 4. Some people might look at that and go, ew, isn't that 0? 4 minus a negative 4 is 0? No, it's not, because we have to switch both the minus to a plus and the negative to a positive. So instead of subtracting a negative 4, we're adding a positive 4, which instead of 0 would actually be 8. Okay, so now the idea would be to go do those Khan Academy assignments. I know our internet is down, so I will give you more time to do that. Oh, the next time we have class is Friday. So we don't really have class because you're home, but we're supposed to be distance learning. So let's figure out how we want to do this. Do you want to actually have class on Friday where you can like click a Zoom link and connect with me to find out what you're supposed to be doing? Because what I will do is I have a meeting at 7:30. And then when my meeting is over, probably by 8:30, because what they're doing is what we used to have as late start Mondays are now late start Fridays. And so if you were in school, you would be following a late start schedule on Fridays, which I'm actually going to do that more or less with my college math class that I have. But I don't mind if I do it with you. I think what I'd rather do with you guys is I'll just be available. I'll have Zoom up and running, and you can just pop in and ask me questions, or you can text me through Remind and ask me questions, or you can email me and ask me questions. And I just want you to be working on the stuff we did this week. So if you can at all have internet at home to work on, or if you don't, we'll figure it out next week. But I will put things up in the calendar. You can work on these 2 Khan Academy assignments for me, and then maybe the benchmark test just from home. If not, we'll do it next Tuesday. If I get the benchmark test assigned, you guys have done benchmark tests in School City before, right? So if you go to School City, it should pop up in your list of benchmarks. If I get it figured out, I'll be able to assign it. Okay, so if